Hello and welcome to another Read With Me session. I'm yours truly, Isabel Bedell, and I'm here to read with you another amazing book on personal and financial freedom. So if you are new to this channel, congratulations. We're happy to have you here. If you don't know anything about this channel, we are focused on personal and financial freedom. Billionairette's mission here is to impact the lives of billions of souls worldwide through education, through personal and financial tools to achieve the ultimate best version of yourself. And every single month, we read two books, one on personal freedom and one on financial freedom. And in this particular segment, we're going to be talking about this book, Limitless by Jim Kwik. Jim Kwik is an amazing author. He's a teacher. He is a person that really has developed a lot of the tools to really increase the productivity, increase the dynamic of how we use our mind so it can become limitless. And I love the fact that Will Smith, if you guys know about Will, amazing actor and person overall, he has the actual forewording in this book. Okay, so check this out. Not the forwarding, he just has this quote. Jim Kwik knows how to get the maximum out of me as a human being. And I love that because we will learn more about why that actually is a true statement. Jim Kwik, he's been working with hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. And he's also worked with athletes. He's worked with actors. He's worked with top CEOs. He's worked with huge companies that have hired him to unlock the potential of not only employees, but also the actual CEOs in the positions that can impact lives worldwide. So if you ever wonder, like, how do billionaires get to a certain point and how do they continue to achieve and grow? He's one of the guys that people have on their speed dial because they want to make sure to increase levels of their potential. And Jim Kwik is the guy. Similar to, like, you know how Tony Robbins is on speed dial for like the president. Jim Kwik is on speed dial for like athletes. Like, I'm about to get into this game. I need a mind reset, or scholars or researchers or top leaders that they just need that push. So Jim Kwik helps them with that. And I love this book because, to be honest, it's one of those books that is fun to read. It's not difficult and you get a lot out of it. So in this particular video, we're going to actually start off the book in not the foreword, not the introduction, but part one. So it's called Becoming Limitless. Becoming Limitless with Jim Kwik. Okay. I'm so stupid, he starts. I don't understand. I'm too dumb to learn. These were my mantras growing up. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't tell myself that I was slow, dumb, and that I could never learn to read, much less amount to anything later in life. If a pill existed that could supercharge my brain and make me smarter in one swallow, as there was in the 2011 Limitless starring Bradley Cooper, I love that movie, by the way, I would have given anything to take it. I wasn't the only one who felt the way that I did about myself. If you'd asked my teachers when I was a kid, many would have said that I was the last person they'd expect to be writing this book for you. And then back then, they would have been surprised to know that I was reading a book, let alone writing one. This all stems from an incident in kindergarten that completely altered the course of my life. And I was in class one day, and there were these sirens outside the window. Everyone in the classroom took notice, and the teachers looked out, and one of them, she said that there was a fire truck. So the entire class responded to the information the way kindergartens do. We immediately rushed to the windows. I was particularly excited because by this point, I was already obsessed with superheroes, which I'm still am. To me, firefighters were the closest thing to real life superheroes that I knew, so I bolted to the window with everyone else. The only problem was that I wasn't tall enough to be able to look down at the fire trucks. One kid went to grab his chair to stand on, and that inspired the rest of us to do the same. I ran back to my desk to get mine, pushing it right up against the huge iron radiator that ran along the bottom of the windows, and I got up on my chair, saw the firefighters, and completely lit up. This was so exciting. My eyes stared and mouth gasped as I watched these courageous heroes in action with their seemingly unpenetratable uniform and their bright red vehicle. But then one of the other kids grabbed my chair from beneath me, which caused me to lose balance and go flying headfirst into the radiator. I hit the metal heater extremely hard and I started losing blood. The school rushed me to the hospital where doctors tended to my wounds, but they were candid with my mother afterward. The injury to my brain was not mild. My mother said, I was never quite the same after that. Where I had been an energized, confident, and curious child before, now I was noticeably shut down and had a new difficulty learning. I found it extremely hard to focus. I couldn't concentrate, and my memory was awful. As you can imagine, school became an ordeal for me. Teachers would repeat themselves until I learned to pretend to understand, and while all the other kids were learning to read, I couldn't make any sense out of the letters. Do you remember getting into those reading circles, passing around the book, and having to read out loud? For me, that was the worst. Nervously waiting as the book crept closer and closer, only to look at the page and not understand one word. I think that's where my crippling fear of public speaking initially came from. And it would take me another 3 years to be able to read. And it continued to be a struggle, an uphill battle for a really long time after that. I'm not sure I would ever have learned to read if it weren't for the heroes I met and saw in comic books. Regular books couldn't hold my attention at all, but my fascination with comic books drove me to keep pushing myself until I could read their stories without waiting for someone else to read them to me. And I would read them by flashlight under my covers late at night, and those stories were the ones that gave me hope that one person could overcome impossible odds. My favorite superheroes growing up were the X-Men. Not because they were the strongest, but because they were misunderstood and weirdly different. I felt I could relate to them. They were mutants. They didn't fit into society, and people who didn't understand them shunned them. That was me. Minus the superpowers, the X-Men were outcast, and so was I. I belonged in their world. I grew up in Westchester County, a suburb of New York City, and I was super excited one night to discover that according to the comic books, Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters was located near me. When I was 9 years old, I would get on my bike nearly every weekend to ride around my neighborhood looking for the school. I was obsessed. I thought if I could only locate it, I would find in that school a place where I finally fit in. A place where it was safe to be different, a place where I could discover and develop my own superpowers. Look how cute Jim Kwik is when he was 9. Like, look at the ride, y'all. Look at the whip. Wow. He's a good one. Then we go into the boy with the broken brain. In the real world, life was not very kind. It was around this time that my grandmother, who lived with us and helped raise me, started showing advanced signs of dementia. Watching someone you love lose their mind and memory is very hard to describe. It was like losing her over and over until she passed. She was my world, and combined with my learning challenges, she is why I'm so passionate about brain health and fitness. Back in school, I was bullied and made fun of, and not just on the playground, but in the classroom too. I remember one day in elementary school, a teacher, she was so frustrated because I wasn't getting the lesson. She pointed at me and said, "That's the boy with the broken brain." I was just crushed to realize that this was how she saw me and that others probably saw me the same way. Mm, deep, deep. Often, when you put a label on someone or something, you create a limit. The label becomes the limitation. Adults have to be very careful with their external words because these quickly become a child's internal words. That's what happened with me in that moment. Whenever I struggled to learn, did badly on a quiz, wasn't picked for the team in gym class, or fell behind with my other classmates, I would tell myself it was because my brain was broken. How could I possibly expect to do as well as others did? I was damaged. My mind didn't work like everyone else's. Even when I studied much harder than my schoolmates, my grades never reflected the effort I was putting in. I was too stubborn to give up and managed to move on from grade to grade, but I was hardly thriving. While I was advanced in math because of the help of my few of my academically talented friends, I was horrible at most of the subjects, especially classes such as English, reading, foreign languages, and music. And then in my freshman year of high school, things got to the point where I was at risk of failing English. My parents were called in by my teacher to discuss what I could do to muster a passing grade. She offered an extra credit project for me, and I was to write a report comparing the lives of accomplishments of two geniuses, Leonardo da Vinci and Albert Einstein. She told me that if I did a good job on this report, she would be able to give me enough points to make sure that I passed the class. I consider this to be a huge opportunity, a chance to hit the reset button on what had been a difficult start to my high school career. I committed everything that I had to writing the best report I possibly could. I spent hours and hours and hours at the library after school trying to learn everything I could learn about these two brilliant minds while working on this paper. And interestingly enough, during that research, I came across multiple mentions that Albert Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci each struggled with alleged learning difficulties. After weeks of effort, I typed up the final report. I was so proud of what I'd done that I had the pages professionally bounded. This report was a statement for me. It was the way I was going to announce to the world what I was capable of doing. The day the report was due, I put it in my backpack, excited about handing it to my teacher, and even more excited about the response that I anticipated she would have to what I'd done. I planned to give it to her at the end of class, so I sat through whatever we were doing that day, trying to concentrate, but constantly finding my thoughts fiddling back to the look I expected to see on my teacher's face when I presented her with the report. But then she threw a curveball at me. I was definitely not prepared for this one. About halfway through the class period, the teacher ended her lesson and told the students that she had a surprise for them. She said that I had been working on an extra credit report and that she would like me to present it to the whole entire class right now. I had spent most of my school life trying to shrink so small that I wouldn't be called in class. So when you are the one that's broken, the broken one, you don't feel like you have much to offer. I was beyond shy, and I didn't like to draw attention to myself. My superpower back in the day was being invincible. Sorry, invisible. Invisible. Yeah, like you can't see. I was also deathly afraid of speaking in public. I'm not exaggerating here. If you hooked me up to a heart monitor at that moment, I might have broken the machine. And on top of this, I could barely breathe. There was simply no way I was going to be able to stand in front of everyone and talk to them about the work that I'd done. So I took the only option I saw available to me. Wow. I'm sorry. I didn't do it. I stuttered, and just barely getting the words out of my mouth. The expression of disappointment on my teacher's face, so different from the expression that I'd fantasized earlier. It was so profound that my heart nearly broke, but I just couldn't do what she wanted me to do. When class was over, after everyone had left, I threw my report in the garbage, and along with it, a big part of my self-respect and worth. You are closer than you think. Somehow, in spite of all the troubles I had in school, I managed to get into a local university. I thought being a freshman in college meant a last opportunity to make a fresh start. I dreamt about making my family proud and to showing the world, and more importantly myself, that I did have the potential to succeed. I was in the new environment. College professors taught me differently than high school teachers did. And no one at this college had any preconceived notions about me. I worked my butt off, but I actually wound up doing even worse in my college classes than my high school. A few months into this, I started to face my reality. I couldn't see the point of wasting time, money that I didn't have. I was ready to quit altogether. I told a friend about my plans, and he suggested that before I made the decision, I would go with him to visit his family over the weekend. He thought that getting me away from the campus might give me some perspective. When we arrived, his father showed me around their property before dinner. Along the way, he asked how school was going for me. It was probably the worst question anyone could have asked at that time, and I'm sure my response stunned him. I erupted into tears, now holding back the tears, crying, but straight up bawling. I could see he was taken aback by this, but his innocent question had broken the dam holding back so many pent-up emotions. I told him the whole boy with the broken brain story while he listened patiently. And when I was finished, he looked me directly in my eyes. Jim, why are you in school? He said. What do you want to be? What do you want to do? What do you want to have? What do you want to share? I didn't have immediate answers to any of these questions, but no one had ever asked me them before. But I felt as though I needed to answer them now. I started to speak, and he stopped me. He tore a couple pieces of paper from his pocket diary and told me to write down my answers. In this book, I'll show you how to actually write some of the questions to learn and achieve anything faster. I spent the next several minutes writing a bucket list. When I was finished, I began finding and folding up all of the papers and preparing them to put them in my pocket. But as I was doing so, my friend's father grabbed the pages out of my hand. I freaked out because I didn't think that I'd written I didn't think what I'd written was going to be read by anyone else, and especially this complete stranger. But he opened the pages and read while I stewed in my discomfort. It seemed as though he took hours to read what I had written, though I'm sure it was only a minute or two. When he finished, he said, "You're this close," holding the index fingers on the right and on the left, about a foot apart. You're about this close to getting exactly what you want. The statement seemed so absurd to me. I told him I couldn't crack this list if I had 10 lifetimes. But then he took his fingers and, without expanding the distance between them, placed one on each side of my head. The space he was describing was my brain. That's the key, he said. Come with me. I have something to show you. We walked back to the house where he took me to a room that I had never seen before. It was filled wall to wall, floor to ceiling with books. Now, remember at that point in my life when I was not a fan of books? This was like being in a room full of snakes. But what made it even worse was that he started grabbing snakes from the shelves and handing them to me. I looked at all the titles and realized these were biographies of incredible men and women throughout history, as well as some of the early personal growth books, such as The Magic of Thinking Big, The Power of Positive Thinking, and Think and Grow Rich. Jim, I want you to read one of these books a week. My first thought was, have you not been listening to anything I've been saying? I didn't ask this out loud, but I did respond. I don't know how I could do that. Reading doesn't really come easily to me, and I have absolutely so much schoolwork to do. He held up a finger saying, "Don't let school interfere with your education." I later learned he was paraphrasing a quote often attributed to Mark Twain. "Look," I said, "I understand how reading these books would really be helpful, but I don't want to make any promises I can't keep." He paused and then reached into his pocket, pulled out the bucket list, and started reading each one out loud. There is something about hearing my dreams in another person's voice that messed with my mind and my soul, something fierce. Truth be told, many of the things on that list were things that I wanted to do for my family, things my parents could never afford or would never have done for themselves, even if they would afford it. Hearing this out loud moved me in ways I didn't think was possible. It deeply tapped me into my drive and purpose. When he was finished, I told him I would do exactly what he suggested, though secretly I had no idea how I was going to accomplish that feat. Asking the right question. I went back to school after that weekend, armed with books he'd given me. On my desk were now two piles. One that I had to read for school, and the other one was I promised to read. The scale of what I'd agreed to register with me as intense. How was I going to make a dent into these piles when reading was such a labor for me? I was already struggling to get enough through the first pile. What was I going to do? Where would I get some time for all this? So I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I didn't exercise, I didn't watch television or spend time with my friends. Instead, I practically lived at the library until one night when I passed out from sheer exhaustion and fell down a flight of stairs, sustaining yet another head injury. What? It wasn't until 2 days later that I woke up in a hospital and I thought I had died. And maybe part of me wished that I had. It was truly a dark and low point in my life. I was wasting away. My weight was down to 117 pounds, and I was so dehydrated that I was hooked up to IV bags. Oh, look at this picture of him. Oof. As miserable as I was, I said to myself, there has to be a better way. At the moment, a nurse came into my room carrying a mug of tea with a picture of Einstein on it, the very same subject of the book report that inspired me to dig deep and study back in grade school. The quote next to this image said, "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it." That's when it dawned on me. Maybe I was asking the wrong question. I started to wonder, what was my real problem? I knew I was a slow learner, but I had been thinking the same way about it for years. I realized that I was trying to solve my learning problems by thinking the way I'd been taught to think, to just work harder. But what if I could teach myself a better method to learn? What if I could learn in a way that was more efficient, effective, and even more enjoyable? What if I could learn how to learn faster? I committed in that very moment to finding that way. And with that commitment, my mindset began to shift. I asked the nurse for a course bulletin and flipped through it page by page. And after a couple hundred pages, I could find nothing but classes on what to learn: Spanish, history, math, science. But there was no classes teaching students how to learn. Learning how to learn. When I got out of the hospital, I was so intrigued by the idea of learning how to learn that I set my studies aside and focused on only the books that my mentor gave me, as well as books that I found on adult learning theory, multiple intelligence theory, neuroscience, personal growth, educational psychology, speed reading, and ancient mnemonics. I wanted to know what older cultures did to pass on knowledge before they had external storage devices like the printing press and computers. I was so obsessed to solve this riddle. How does my brain work? So I can work my brain. About a couple months of deep immersion into my new self-directed studies, a light switch flipped on. My ability to focus was stronger. I started to understand new concepts because I was able to concentrate. I was no longer easily distracted. I could better recall information that I had studied weeks before with little difficulty. I had new levels of energy and curiosity for the first time in my life. I could read and comprehend information in a fraction of the time that I used to take. My newfound competence gave me the sense of confidence that I had never felt before. My daily life changed to, I was clear. I knew what to do to move myself forward and I unlocked an empowering and sustainable sense of motivation. With these results, my mindset changed and I started to believe that anything was possible. But I was so upset. It seemed to me all of my years of self-doubt and suffering could have been avoided if this critical method of meta-learning, learning how to learn, had been taught in school. I remember teachers telling me constantly to study and concentrate harder, telling a child to do things like concentrate is like telling them to play the ukulele. It's a very difficult thing to do, and ever being taught how. Following the hero's journey, I couldn't help but share the treasure and lessons I learned. I started tutoring these methods to other students. The turning point came when I worked with a freshman who wanted to learn how to read faster, boost comprehension, and retain information she was studying. She worked diligently and achieved her goal of reading 30 books in 30 days, and I knew she did it. I knew how she did it. I taught her how, and you'll actually learn about this in chapter 14. But I wanted to know why. I discovered that her motivation was that her mother was diagnosed with a terminal cancer and she was determined to save her by studying books on health, wellness, and medicine. And months later, she called me crying with tears of joy to tell me that her mother's cancer was in remission. It was at that moment that I realized that if knowledge is power, then learning is our superpower. And our capacity to learn is limitless. We simply need to be shown how to access it. Seeing the way this woman's life was changed ignited me in a purpose, allowing me to recognize that seeing the way this woman's life was changed ignited in me a purpose, allowing me to recognize what became my life's mission: to teach the mindset, motivation, and methods to upgrade your brain and learn anything faster so you can unlock your exceptional life. Over the course of more than 2 decades, I've developed a reliable and proven set of practical methods to enhance learning, many of which appear in this book, and I have not only kept my promise to read a book a week, but continue to serve and support everyone from children labeled learning disabled to seniors with brain aging challenges. Our team is dedicated to the memory of my grandmother. passionately supports Alzheimer's research, and we believe education is every child's birthright, funding the creation of schools around the world from Guatemala to Kenya, providing healthcare, clean water, and learning for children in need via amazing organizations such as the We Charity and Pencils for Promise. That's our mission, to build better, brighter brains, and we're leaving no brain behind. I've taught these techniques to others with astonishing results, leading me to address more than 150,000 people in live audiences each year in every field imaginable, to serve as the brain coach to top personalities in sports and entertainment, to train at many of the world's leading companies and universities, to lead a large accelerated learning online platform with students from 195 countries, and to host a top educational podcast called Kwik Brain with tens of millions of downloads, and to have my teachings receive hundreds of millions of video views. This book is filled with lessons and practical advice I've learned over the years, along with wisdom and resources from many of my guests who have been featured on our show. I say all of this because, having dedicated my life to researching and teaching this subject, I know what's inside this book. And more importantly, I know what's inside of you. Wow. That's awesome. And last but not least, finding Professor X's school. There's a serendipitous coda to this story. As I mentioned, I regularly offer brain coaching to CEOs and to their teams. A few years ago, Jim Kwik, the then CEO and chairman of the 20th Century Fox, invited me to do a coaching session with his executive team. I went on to the film lot on a Friday morning and spent several hours with his top staff members. They were particularly open to my message, and they instantly connected to the techniques. And when the session was over, Jim came to me and said, "That was incredible. It was one of the very best training sessions we'd ever held." I was delighted to hear this, of course. Who doesn't love positive feedback? Later, during the tour of the lot, my eye landed on a poster for the Wolverine movie, which was scheduled to come out later that year. I pointed to the poster and said, "I can't wait to see that film. I'm a huge fan." "Oh yeah? You like superheroes?" Jim asked. "I love them. The X-Men have played a major role in my life." I went on to tell him about my childhood brain injury and how comic books helped me learn to read and my search for Professor X's school. He smiled at me. "We have another 30 days of shooting on the next X-Men movie on Montreal. Why don't you come along and spend a week on the set? The actors would love to work with you." There was no way I was going to turn this opportunity down. I'd never been on a movie set before, and this was just not any movie. It was an X-Men movie set. The next morning, we got on a plane they called the X-Jet. The other passengers included most of the mutant cast, and I found myself sitting between Jennifer Lawrence and Halle Berry. This was the turning point, out to be the best day ever. On the plane and the next week on set, I got to share some of my brain tips for speed reading scripts and for remembering lines with some of the extraordinary cast and crew. And guess what? The very first scene, I got to see them shoot. I saw them shoot took place in Professor X's school. Wow. The very first place that I spent endless days imagining and searching for when I was a kid. It was such a surreal moment for me. "What's one of you?" And then he asked, "What's one of your dreams? One that is ever present, like a splinter in your brain. Imagine it in vivid detail, visualize it, feel it, believe it, and work daily for it." Amazingly, that's not the best part of this. When I got back from the trip, I came home to this huge package, as if there was a flat screen TV in it. I opened the package and pulled out an enormous framed photograph of me with the entire X-Men cast. The photo had a note from the chairman, and it read, "Jim, Thank you so much for sharing the superpowers with all of us. I know you've been working for your superhero school ever, so here it is. Here's a class photo. And then it actually has the entire class photo of them together with Jim and the entire X-Men class. That's cool. That's cool. So he has this definition of what the word unlimiting means. It's a noun and it's unlimiting. Okay, unlimiting. The act or process of casting aside inaccurate and restrictive perceptions of one's potential and embracing that reality that with the right mindset, motivation, and methods, there are no limitations. For so much of my life, I allowed myself to be defined by my perceived restrictions. I'd gotten what I thought was a terrible break when I was a kid. And I was convinced that this had the set course for a compromised future. But with the help of some people, I came to discover that my perceived restrictions were actually not restrictions at all. They were merely obstacles that I needed to overcome, limitations that I needed to unlearn. And when I did, what I could learn to be or do each day became limitless. Becoming limitless is not just about accelerating learning, speed reading, and having an incredible memory. Yes, you will learn how to do all of that and more, but being limitless is not about being perfect. It's about progressing beyond what you currently believe is possible. And just as you've learned limits from your family, culture, and life experiences, you can unlearn them. These constraints are only temporary obstacles that you can learn to overcome. What I have come to find over my years of working with people is that most everyone limits and shrinks their dreams to fit their current reality. We convince ourselves that the circumstances we are in, the beliefs we've accepted, and the path that we are on is who we are and who will always be. But there is another choice. You can learn to unlimit and expand your mindset, your motivation, your methods to create an unlimited life, limitless life. When you do that, others will receive that too. When you do what others won't, you can live how others can't. And by reading this book, you have taken an important step. And remember, one step is better direction that can completely change your destination. The key when you are taking the steps is to have a map, a model of success. Armed with this, there is absolutely no trial or dragon that you can't overcome. That's awesome. And with that, we will be leaning into the next chapter in the next Read With Me session, where we learn more about how mindset, the methods, and motivation all come together to create the limitless model. And just a little preview of that, it looks like this. So I highly encourage you to actually grab a physical copy of this book. I have the digital version and it's awesome. And it's a beautiful way to just keep these handy notes accessible, whether you're traveling, whether you're moving around like we are this year. We are all over the US. So we're super excited to just continue doing these Read With Me sessions and really bringing to light the opportunity that we have at the palm of our hands. So without further ado, I hope you got a lot out of this Read With Me session. More to come, a lot more to come. And hope you have an amazing, amazing rest of your day. See you soon.